When you think about it, it's actually hard to fathom that it's been 40 years or even more since we've actually had a good interpretation, a good picture of what Superman really looks like on the big screen. Since the original Donner film in 1978, the year that I was born, we certainly had a lot of sequels to that, some of which I thought were good. I liked Superman 2, but after that, it pretty much falls off a cliff. We did get the Man of Steel from Zack Snyder. Very divisive film. I don't think it's a Superman movie. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just not Superman. It never felt right. Certainly never felt right in Batman versus Superman or the Justice League movies. And it's all on James Gunn now. He has taken all the pressure onto himself. He's not just the CEO or co-CEO of DC Studios. He's not just the writer of Superman. He's actually the director of Superman 2. Yes, he hired himself. A bold choice, perhaps, but definitely a big-time gamble on that. And we do have the first little bit of a plot synopsis of what this movie is going to be. And Warner Brothers officially revealed the first synopsis of Superman Legacy, the upcoming reboot film of the titular hero, which will be directed and produced by co-CEOs James Gunn and Peter Safran. Superman Legacy tells the story of Superman's journey to reconcile his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing as Clark Kent of Smallville, Kansas. He is the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way, guided by human kindness in a world that sees kindness as old-fashioned. So not a whole lot of information there. We don't know who the villain's going to be. But generally speaking, we know what James Gunn is going to be focusing in on when he makes this Superman movie. And I must say, at least half of that I do find troubling. That would be Superman's journey to reconcile his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. That's not really who Clark Kent Superman is. That's not really who Kal-El is. Certainly, he is Kryptonian. And he knows that his father is Jor-El, and he knows that he's not from Earth, that he's actually from Krypton, and his parents know that he's not from Earth and he's from Krypton, and that's why he has the wonderful gifts that he does have. That's why he's able to fly and move faster than a speeding bullet, and he has heat vision and all these things because of the way that his DNA interacts with our yellow sun. So those are the foundational pieces of the powers that Superman has, but his Kryptonian heritage has never really been like a big focus or problem for Clark Kent to deal with. In fact, when you see him in DC Comics throughout the years, when he meets an alien race for the first time, he never introduces himself as Kal-El from Krypton. He introduces himself as Superman or Clark Kent of Earth, because that's kind of how he sees himself. And his human upbringing is what has actually driven him to be the man that he is, the Superman that he is. The reason that he's a superhero isn't because he can fly. It's not because he has heat vision. And it's not because he has all these wonderful physical gifts, and immunity and all these things. The fact that he's so strong and he can be hit by a bullet and not be hurt, that's not really what makes Superman actually Superman. It's not what makes him a superhero. It's what makes him very powerful. The reason he's a superhero is because of his humanity and the fact that Clark Kent and his identity is, in fact, trenched in humanity itself, not really Krypton. So I don't understand how that can be the focus of a character when that's never really been a driving factor for who Clark Kent Superman actually is. Even when he meets other Kryptonians through the years, a lot of times he introduces himself as Clark Kent first because that's how he sees himself. So I don't know that that can be the driving factor of a movie when you're trying to make a true essence of Superman film if that's never really been a part of who the character is and never been a part of that personal conflict of what drives the character and makes him make mistakes or puts him in a position to where he's compromised or stuff like that. He would actually never compromise himself or his morals for the betterment of Krypton. That's been proven countless times over and over again. Every time we see a Kryptonian, they're pretty much disappointed with Clark Kent because he's not Kryptonian, because he's human, and he will do anything he can to actually save Earth rather than go out there and reestablish Krypton. That is one of the driving forces of Superman throughout the comic books, is when Kryptonians show up, a lot of times they have a plan for him and he will not go along with it because he just simply does not care. He does not see himself that way. So I think focusing on that is probably a folly, although I will say calling him the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way, guided by human kindness in a world that sees kindness as old-fashioned, is absolutely at the essence of what Superman is, at least in 2023. Obviously, when he was first introduced, it was a different era, and certainly the character probably fit in with the times just a little bit more, just as far as public sentiment and the sensibilities of the culture at the time. But a lot of people do see Superman as old-fashioned, maybe out of date. Maybe he isn't relevant in modern times. And I like that James Gunn and Peter Safran are looking at the character and saying, Superman is more relevant today than ever, and those old-fashioned sensibilities that he learned in Smallville from his parents, Mom and Pa Kent, the real driving factors behind the hero himself, the reason that Clark Kent is Superman, I think that is a really good exploration and really can separate what makes Superman so amazing within the DC universe and pushing the DCU moving forward. That's really the important part here, because this is the opening salvo of DC Studios. This is going to set the tone for what the DCU is moving forward. It's not going to be Batman. It's not going to be Wonder Woman. It's not going to be Aquaman, even though he had $1 billion film. They put all the cards on the table and they put their bets behind Superman, resonating with people. And I think the way that that's going to happen is a return to understanding who the character is and what really motivates and drives him and what makes him so amazing within the DC universe, besides the fact that he can fly. Because there's 100 million heroes out there that can actually fly. If you go look at what's available in public domain, basically every hero from that era is a version of Superman. DC Comics also has Shazam, another hero with very similar powers, but a different motivation that separates him from Superman. So you can't just focus on that he's Kryptonian and he's got these powers. Yes, that is important, and that is part of what being Superman is, but the essence of Superman and what makes him different is because of his morality, his kindness, and his humanity. The Direct.com has an hypothesis based on that information on the synopsis, where it says, a world that sees kindness as old-fashioned could hint that the Superman reboot may be taking inspiration from Joe Kelly's What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, a story where the Man of Steel had a moral struggle when he went head-to-head with a violent team of heroes known as the Elite. It is unknown if the Elite would actually be the villains in Superman Legacy. Now, obviously, the Elite are probably not going to be the Superman villains within Superman Legacy, but certainly the Authority, which was DC's kind of generic version of the Elite. We know that they are going to be a part of the DCU, and they're going to be a big part. James Gunn has already said that. He's already said we're going to Warren Ellis's The Authority as a definitive version of these characters, and it makes sense that they would actually go off against Superman. And I stated when they announced that they were going to do an Authority movie, like the Authority can't work in the DC universe where Superman exists, because he would root them out and have to destroy them because they're such an enormous threat to the world. So I do think there's a good chance we'll see the Authority fighting Superman as that opposing force that's pointing out that your kindness, your morality, your old-fashioned sensibilities are no longer relevant in today's society. And obviously, we'll see Superman prevail and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a good chance that that's actually where they're heading. Obviously, we're also going to get an Authority movie as well. So it could be exciting. I hope they do focus in on what makes Superman special besides being Kryptonian, because even to the character himself, it's not that big of a deal, and it never really has been. But there is no doubt that James Gunn has the weight of the entire DCU on his shoulders. He's got the weight of Warner Brothers on his shoulder. He's got the weight of the future of this entire franchise hanging in the balance for Superman Legacy when it comes out. This is what The Guardian had to say about that in a recent article. His challenge is to bring back the Superman we once knew and loved without offering up a pale imitation of Donner's film. This needs to be a life-affirming, joyously epic experience that makes everyone forget that any of the sardonic, in-jokey, wonderfully throwaway Marvel movies ever existed. It needs to define an entirely new era of the superhero genre, a true second coming for the Man of Steel on the big screen, almost a half a century after the first wowed audiences. That is a big task to ask anyone, including James Gunn, despite the fact that he's been very successful. But then when you think about what is his actual plate going to be, he is the co-CEO of DC Studios. He's the writer of the film. He's the director of the film. He's going to have so much responsibility moving into this. He will likely feel overwhelmed on a daily basis just for the amount of pressure that he's put on himself to get this right. And he's got a lot of work to do, because I've watched a lot of James Gunn written movies. I watched a lot of James Gunn directed movies. I've never seen a movie that James Gunn has written and directed that ever made me think that he could actually make a Superman film that would have the gravitas, that would understand the character and wouldn't be so goddamn meta and jokey on itself to where it could actually stand up and be a great Superman film. I've seen movies like that be taken out of a James Gunn script where he's not directing it, where the director takes his sensibilities and makes it a little bit more serious, because James Gunn is incredibly talented as a writer. He knows how to get to the essence of a character. He knows how to set up those big moments that can define a character. But he also, when he's in charge and he's directing, he does not know how to edit himself. He doesn't know how to pull himself out of the project, almost like a Taika Waititi, but not nearly as annoying when he does that. You saw it in the Suicide Squad. We certainly have seen it in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Volume 1 and 2. And I imagine we're going to see that in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Can James Gunn, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, tackle the problem that is Superman? A problem that has not been solved in 40 years on the big screen. Warner Brothers has put out a lot of efforts to make this work, and it's never worked. I personally do not think that he's the right director for the project, but I do hope I'm proven wrong in the long run, that he takes the character seriously, he understands who Superman is, and he gets to the heart of that, he puts that front and center, and really understands why people should love Superman, and it's not all the inside jokes, and does he take his tights off when he has sex with Lois, and if he has sex with Lois, is he going to blow her head off, with one shot, kind of thing like that, which James Gunn is going to want to talk about because he's just that kind of guy when he's a writer-director. So can James Gunn stop himself from being James Gunn when he's directing? We shall see. The Kryptonian thing I do think is very troubling because that is the wrong focus on the character. Everyone knows that Superman is Kryptonian, including Superman himself, but he thinks of himself as Clark Kent. It's always been that way in comic books, and it's just not really that big of an internal conflict with the character. Another problem is we have seen some Hollywood hacks get a hold of Superman, at least in comic books, and their version of Superman and the way that they change his mythos is a lot of times troubling. The latest addition would be when Gary Whitta included Superman, changed his mythos during Batman the Fortress, one of the worst stories you'll ever read in your life. He ruins Batman and Superman. If you haven't seen this video and what Gary Whitta did to him, you will not believe it. There's also a link in the video description.